Hello, today's video has to do with haccp. It is a system that is ready to be made in all the structures and the companies where people have to do with food intake. This is a speech that is presented for the fifth level. It is a class of the sector of cooking. This is a class that is in Federico Flora, which is a school located in Pordenone. It is a plan or a sort of book that has to be structured and built up by all those people that are the responsible men and women having to do with food intake. It is a book at the end, sort of structure and plan that has to do with some measures. We know that when we have to do with food intake, we have to be very cautious about what the final product is for the final consumer. So this is the acronym of a few codes having to do with H stands for we may say the hazard, and then you have the A that stands for analysis, and then you have the C that stands for control, and C for critical, so critical control, and P for points. This is a book going back to the European community when it was introduced in Europe in the year 1993, but it became a requirement, a legal one, a legal requirement in 2006. All the people we have said before having to do with food intake need to go through these measures that are very important and very relevant when you have to do with food. We know that food can get perished, can get contaminated, can have pathogens and germs and bacteria, just because these measures are not kept under control. So everyone having a restaurant, having a bar, having a snack house, having a pizza house, having a hotel, and they have to do with the food intake, they need to keep under their control, just to arrive to the distribution of the good product until the product arrives on the table for the consumer. We know that there are three main substances that produce problems and hazard from the point of view of biological structures or chemical substances, or even we may speak of physical substances. Biological bacteria are the ones, for instance, that are produced when you have to do with bread, and the bread was not properly wrapped, but it was left in the open air, and there is that substance that has the color of a green and yellow spot on the bread, and so bacteria have been produced. You speak also of chemical substances when these substances are produced or have been produced just by some other bacteria that, just because, for instance, the food was stored not in a proper place, because normally the place has to be dry or has to be cool, but it was maybe a place or an area that was full of humidity. So in this case, the food was contaminated by pathogens or maybe by bacteria. You also speak of another substance There could be, for instance, a metal or a little piece of plastic that was manufactured by the factory at the moment of the production of the product. So in this case, even you speak of a sort of contamination. There is a physical contamination. This book is very important because it has to present 7 points, and it is through these 7 points that the runner of a company has to go through if he wants to arrive to the distribution of the final product in a good way. So the first step has to do with the analysis. It is when the runner of a company and also the staff as a consequence that has to be instructed even, they have to analyze and to be sort of observant of what the chain is like. I mean that during the chain from the moment of the factory and the manufacturing and the storing and the packaging and the handling of the products up to the final distribution. Along this chain, the goods may get contamination and may get risks. So they have to analyze the chain. Then you have the second point that has to do with determination. So I mean that in this phase, the runner or the chief and responsible person has to identify the critical points. A critical point could be, for instance, when you have to do with temperature, and the temperature is not taken into consideration. For instance, if you have the delivery of the goods to a restaurant, you have to, also measure, why not, the temperature of the van. But this is a system that doesn't have to be all the times the delivery of the goods, is established, but it can be done once at random. It is a form of casualty that sometimes is necessary just because it gives you the control of the system also on the side of the person that is the transporter. So in the second phase, the person has, we were saying before, to identify the critical points and to keep the important measures to avoid contamination, deterioration, and also infections. The third point has to do with limits. So we know that there is a range of limitations from the limits that go from the bottom to the ones that are on top. You speak of an exaggeration or an exceed of when the limitation goes beyond the borders. So in this case, you have to go back to the previous point of the chain, and you have to make a sort of readaptation of what was wrong, and you have to make a sort of adjustment. After you have individualized the critical point. Number 4 of the long procedure of this haccp, or in Italian we call it haccp, is the phase of monitoring. So it means that a person has to monitor and observe all the things every time. It is not something to be to do, to be done at random just once, but it has to be, recorded and registered all the times. So it is a sort of screening, of skimming of everything. Another point that is the next is called the intervention. So I mean that sometimes if there are any deviations from the rule, they have to be taken into consideration, and the interventions of man, of the human kind, is very important. The last but one step has to do with the implementation. So it means that these interventions have to be implemented and have to be increased all the times. There is a sort of control that has to be implemented whenever the situation is at risk. You have the final step that is called recording. So you need to keep a book of all the recordings that you have to write and indicate in this book. I mean that if you found out that the temperature of the van when the goods arrived was not, under the right control of the transportation or of the system from the moment when the goods left the company to the very moment when the delivery was taken. It means that this is a critical point and it has to be valued and it has to be under control. It has to be written down, and the recording of this critical point or risk has to be recorded in this book. The book is essential to be taken inside the company, just because you may have someone coming to your company sometimes just for an inspection, just because they want to supervise if everything is taken under in a good order. And especially if you don't have any books, or you have the book but it is not taken with the maximum control inside your company, you can get a fine. Then I would like to give my students some of the examples you may have because of infections of the food. One of these is when you, for instance, you store the food in a bad way. Imagine that you have the goods that have just arrived, and you store the raw materials together with the ready-made or just cooked, we say, foods. We know that the raw materials, especially the meat, the red meat, has to be left in a refrigerator at the bottom of this refrigerator. It doesn't have to be left on top because the wrap can drip, and the blood can also contaminate the other food. Another measure has to do with the deterioration of the package. So when you go also out for shopping, you always have to check if the package is properly wrapped up. If it is not wrapped up in a proper way, you can find maybe some liquid or maybe some fluid that is inside the package or the transparent plastic, and you don't have to buy this parcel or this package. You have to leave that inside the refrigerator in the supermarket. Another thing has to do with the separation. The food, the different types of food have to be left separated from the ones that are, raw materials or eggs. Eggs and poultry, for instance, may produce germs or pathogens, and so in this case, they have to be left far from some other types of products inside the refrigerator or the fridge. Then another thing has to do with the difficult phase of the frosting. When you defrost different types of food, you know that also the time is essential in order to have in order to avoid the contamination. So when you, for instance, use the knife for cutting the raw meat, red meat, that has just arrived at the final point after the frosting, you don't have to use the same knife for cutting vegetables. So different utensils or different knives or different, things or cookware that you use inside the working station need to be washed and cleaned and left separate. Also, the working station needs to be washed and cleaned, and also the uniform of the brigade needs to be cleaned. It means that the people have to wash their hands properly before touching the food. So also the surfaces and the tables need to be washed and cleaned. All the times you have used the products for their process. I think I have finished for today, and now my students of the 5th class are asked to reply to a few questions. The questions will be found inside the electronic register in the proper phase. Okay, have a nice time to everybody, and very soon I'm going to see you through probably Skype or through another system that is a contacting system like Moodle. Okay, bye bye everybody. Have a nice homework.